All right, well, I'm Dante. This is David. We're with the Dalton Wade team, the All-American Real Estate team at Dalton Wade. And we have a guest with us today. This is Jennifer Whay with First National Title. They're our title partner. Jennifer,
Hi, nice to meet everybody.
nice to meet you.
Yeah, we're going to put together just a small video series to help first-time home buyers or maybe anybody that's been in a real estate transaction with some of the most common questions we see come up. All right. So for the first one, in regards to a real estate transaction, Jennifer, what exactly is title's role?
Okay, so a title insurance agent in the state of Florida is responsible. We're responsible for conducting a thorough title search on the property. We examine those results, identify any potential issues like issues with past ownerships, title defects, which could be like maybe a previous code enforcement lien or open permit against the property. We issue the title insurance policy and we facilitate the overall closing process. So we work with the buyers, the sellers, lenders, you guys as a real estate agent, gather all the information we need in order to clear title, like loan information in order payoffs. We get HOA information from the seller in order to do estoppels. And then we facilitate the closing, meaning we gather everybody together or we sign them separately depending on where their locations are to sign the closing documents, make sure the buyer sends their funds in, and then we close and disperse the transaction and issue a title insurance policy to the buyer once everything's been completed.
Got it. Okay. So you're kind of like the intermediary between the buyers and the sellers, coordinating everything.
We're like the puppet master, right? We control, to an extent, we control the transaction as far as gathering the information, working with everybody to make sure that we're all on the same page and all on the same common goal to get to closing.
I don't think buyers and sellers realize how big of a role like title company plays in a real estate transaction. A lot of them don't even know what it is until we introduce it to them,
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah, it's so funny because not only do buyers or sellers, but I love when we get somebody new in the industry, especially in title. For instance, everybody that we start here at First International, we like to work them up. So they'll normally start as our admin assistant and they're like, wait, what's a contract? And the best one is like, what's escrow? So then you see them start learning the terminology and then we move them up as a processor and then to a closer. And you wouldn't believe how many times I hear, especially internally, where they're like, I had no idea this is how much work is put into a real estate transaction on our side. And that's not even counting like what all of our partners do. The lenders, they have their own procedures. You guys, it's not only are you running around showing properties, now you're doing the negotiation of the contract. Now you're making sure your home inspector is in there and you guys are meeting your deadlines and, making sure the repairs are done. If the seller agrees to do those, then you have to go back to the property and make sure those repairs have been taken care of. So there's so many hands in the pot that people really don't see, which to me, it's hindsight, right? Me being in the industry, that's the type of people I would want to surround myself. But then if you're not here, you're like, well, wait, what did you do? What'd you do for me? And you're like, here's the list, of things we've done during this transaction. So, sometimes it's nice that we're able to kind of keep them in the dark and let them think this is just the smoothest, easiest transaction that's ever happened. But, with those buyer compensation agreements that came out, kind of, bites us sometimes that they don't actually see all the hard work everybody puts into getting them to the closing table.
That's why we preach, to our clients when we go to make an offer or even on the listing side or doing a listing presentation, how important it is to choose a, reputable, well-known title company, one that you trust and you build that relationship with, because it can make a transaction super smooth or it can make it pretty rocky. I'm sure David and I and yourself have probably had enough experience with that.
Yeah.
So referring back to terms, one question that a lot of my, I would say, buyers, because right now in today's market, most of them are kind of picking title. They ask me about, well, first they get confused with homeowners insurance, but we're going to talk about title insurance. That's what you guys deal with. So one of the questions is like, what's the purpose of it? They always ask like, what is title insurance? Why do we need it?
So title insurance, the most, how should I say this? Technical version of what title insurance is, a policy that protects your investment, right? And your property rights. There's two types of title insurance. There's an owner's policy, which covers your investment up to the purchase price. And then there's a lender's title insurance policy, which protects the lender's interest up to the loan amount. And what it does is it just makes sure that we did our job as far as conveying clear title to you. And just like any insurance policy, if something isn't done correctly or there was an error, which we're all human, right? Everybody makes mistakes. There's health insurance, there's homeowners insurance, everything's insurable. So there's risk to everything. But what this policy does is it's a one-time fee that you pay at closing for your title insurance policy, and it protects you the entire time that you own the property. So say in 5 years, your pesky neighbor is saying, hey, no, that's my property. And now you have a boundary dispute and they're suing you. You would file a claim on your title insurance policy if as long as your survey exceptions are deleted from the policy. And the title insurance underwriter actually defends you in court. It picks up that fee to make sure that they are, protecting you and fighting for your rights to that property. Boundary disputes are probably one of the biggest ones. I started my career in an attorney's office 20 years ago, actually. And we worked for the claims for Fidelity National Title, which is one of the largest title insurance underwriters in the United States, in the world, actually, too. And 9 out of 10 of those claims were boundary disputes. So we're a big advocate here, especially if it's a cash transaction. Get the boundary survey, make sure that your boundary lines are within it, that they're fenced, they're shed, anything is within those boundary lines. So if it's not, we can address it right then and there with the seller, or it gives your buyer the opportunity to decide whether they want to find another property or not.
So do you ever have any cases where they opt out of title insurance?
So a title insurance company cannot handle a real estate transaction without the issuance of title insurance. I would say even as far as back as 5 or 6 years ago, you could find a real estate attorney who would handle a real estate transaction. And then they would just charge you their hourly rate, which by the time you end up paying that on how long it takes us to get a transaction to close, you're paying almost double what it would have cost you for an insurance policy. And then you don't even have coverage. So if something was done incorrectly, most of those attorneys have you sign a ton of hold harmlesses, which therefore you can't go back on them now and sue them to make it right. I had a list of attorneys that would do it. And to this day, I don't know one attorney in Sarasota, Manatee, or Charlotte County that will handle a real estate transaction because the liability is too high.
That makes sense.
Another common question that we get a lot is, how much does title cost? And I know there's a difference between lender's fees and you have insurance and taxes, but I was hoping maybe you could clarify that.
Yeah, so a title insurance policy is actually promulgated in the state of Florida, meaning no matter you close with me, you close with an attorney, it's all the same and it's all regulated based off purchase price or loan amount, whichever one is the highest, right? It's kind of silly to say that because when is your loan amount higher than the purchase price? That's usually with VA loans. Sometimes you could do 100% financing plus the VA funding fee. So that's why it would be based off that loan amount if you were doing VA. But it's based off purchase price. It's a calculation that we all have to use that's per Florida state statute. And the easiest way to kind of get that figure is it's 0.5% of the purchase price. It's typically what a title insurance premium and closing cost is for the client, depending on who picks and pays.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it kind of breaks back to what I said on the first question is right now in today's market, at least in my experience, I'm seeing a lot of buyers pick title, right? Depending on the demand and what market it's really leaning towards. Now, in your experience, Jennifer, who do you see the most times picking title and usually paying for those costs?
So again, because I've been doing this for so long, we used to have, I would say about 10 years ago even, it was very customary based off which county who picked and paid. So for instance, Sarasota County, the buyer used to pick and pay. Charlotte and Manatee County, it was customary for the seller to pick and pay. Well, as soon as things started skyrocketing and we're doing multiple offer situations. Let's face it, in the state of Florida, everything is negotiable, right? So because of that, it's all just based off the terms. A lot of times if you're going in under listing price, the seller is not going to offer to pick up the title insurance. They're going to say, okay, yeah, we'll take that $5,000 or $10,000 less offer, but you're going to pay title. We don't care if it's customary in this county. So everything is negotiable. We always, we like to try and work with our listing agents and say, listen, inform your seller right away, control the transaction, because like you guys, you develop a relationship with your closing agent, which is more than just somebody who has the experience, but it's somebody that you trust and will get your client to the closing table, right? They're vigilant. They stay on top of their files. They have good processing. Their fees are good, whatever relationship you've developed. So how you can do that with your listing appointments is you could say, look, we're going to list it. I have your property right here at $250. But if we list it at $255 and we pick up the closing costs, it's not going to cost you any more money. And now we get to control the transaction. And I can guarantee you, as long as these inspections go good, my title company is going to get this to closing, whoever it is that you guys may use. But it could go the same way with buying. You could go to your buyer and say, hey, we could go in under value. They listed at $250. Let's go in at $240, but you're going to have to pick and pay title because they're probably not going to take a $10,000 hit and another $5,000 in closing costs. So it just depends on what is best for your client. And it's basic. That's how we try to train, especially new agents that get into this industry. We try to train them thinking that way. Think ahead. Prepare your client so that when your seller gets that offer and it's a low ball and they're not going to get mad at you, they're going to be like, oh, well, they're picking up the title, so that'll save me because it's customary in my county for me to pay it. Or if you're going to a buyer's agent, you know, maybe the seller counters back to your buyer and says, hey, we want our full $250, but we're going to pay title. You go back to your buyer and like, yeah, it does look like it's $10,000 more, but in the hindsight, it's only $2 because now they're picking up the title cost. So it's just, I'm such a numbers person. I love playing with the numbers. And the best thing about that is that we have this great app, which I'm sure you guys are very aware of, called First and Agent. You could get it in any of the app stores. And what it does is that you plug in those numbers and it gives you your bottom line. It gives you your closing costs. It could do seller net sheet. And with just like a little flick of your wrist, you can actually move those numbers by, instead of like re-entering everything, it moves them up in $5,000 increments. So you could say, look, your offer came in at $240. You just take your phone like this, flip it, and now the offer's at $245. This is what you're netting, you know, with you paying closing costs. So it's a great app, and it really does help just inform your clients so that when that offer comes in, they're like, man, David and Dante told me this might happen. And then boom, there you are. It's sign here on the dotted line. Let's get this to close.
Yeah, I explained it the same way, like, about the title insurance. It's almost like an incentive. Like if we are at a time right now, we're not kind of seeing that market. But let's say we go back to a market like we had during COVID, where there was a lot more demand, low inventory, and people were competing with other buyers to want a house. Throw in there that you'll pay title. It might not seem like a big thing, but maybe the other offer that somebody else is putting in, they're not offering to pay title. It might not be a huge thing to offer, but it might win you over that house.
Yeah.
Or the other side of things, if we're in a slower market where maybe these sellers aren't getting a whole lot of offers in a short time, and they do come across an offer from a buyer and they're kind of on the fence about it, offer them like, hey, we'll pick and pay title. Just get somewhere near our purchase price or in the ballpark, and let's negotiate that first, and then we'll throw an incentive in there or even splitting it. I've had one transaction where they split it.
Yeah, that's a lot common, especially for sale by owners, or if we get those, they split it, or if it's in a negotiation price where they just can't meet and they're like, okay, let's split it here. And sometimes it's just, especially, you know, having such great agents like you guys, you're very familiar with the closing process. You know what closing fees are. You could go to your client and say, look, we're talking about $2,500. If we don't accept this offer and your house stays on the market for one more month, now you have a whole month of homeowners insurance. You have a whole month of a mortgage payment. You have another month of utilities. We're already at $3,000. So did you save any money by doing this? You know, so there's ways of negotiating and showing your clients what those numbers are.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, I remember being told it's customary here to do this and it's customary there to do that. But in the current market, everything, especially from what I've seen, everything's negotiable. Inspections, title, everything. So,
which is great. It's a great thing about this state, right? It's not, you know, everything is negotiable. Our contracts are so well written. That is one thing I'll give, you know, the state of Florida. They worked with the Florida Bar Association and the Florida Association of Realtors and really came together. And our contracts they're just solid. You know, they're great contracts. There's no questions. It says, hey, if you're picking and paying title, these are the fees you need to expect, you know? So there's no questions about it if your clients are reading those contracts.
And I think we already talked about this, but you mentioned boundary disputes being the most common issue that comes up. So is that what you typically see the most, like with issues in title?
Yeah, so if we ever do title search and there's a title issue, or title defect is what we call it. And a title defect is something that's outside your normal transaction. Let's face it, most people have mortgages on their property, right? Not most properties, but half the properties have homeowners associations. So those requirements to order an estoppel, those requirements to get payoffs, those are just your standard requirements in order to clear title on most properties. Some of the things that we see, which boundary disputes don't show up on a title report, those show up on boundary surveys. So if it's a cash transaction, it is not required to have a boundary survey to close, but your survey exceptions from your title policy will not be deleted, meaning that that's an exception to your policy, are those boundary lines, right? Because we don't know what they are because you didn't get a boundary survey to show us what they are. On a finance deal, lenders require you to get a boundary survey in order for us to give them something called a Florida Form 9 endorsement. And this Florida Form 9 endorsement to the policy just basically says like, hey, there's no boundary disputes, right? That's the major thing of this, and the major like chunk of this endorsement. So we get that boundary survey to show the lender. The way I look at it is if it's that important to a lender to get one to make sure that their policy is clear, it should be just as important to the consumer to get one too. most boundaries most properties, they don't really change, right? Unless you're adding a pool or something like that. But most people who buy their property, my dad's owned his for 28 years. He's never made one improvement to it, right?
Right.
So it's still the same picture of the same house. And boundary surveys can range anywhere from like standard lots are 320 to 375. So you have that boundary survey, then your survey exceptions, are deleted from the policy. So if that neighbor next door says, hey, no, that this part of that back half of the property is mine, or that shed or your fence is on my property, you have that boundary dispute. So if it ever becomes a legal action, your title insurance policy covers you. I would say the other biggest thing that we do see on a commitment that comes in are code enforcement liens. Code enforcement liens are superior liens. So it's kind of like child support and federal tax liens. They do not get waived. So they're not waived in foreclosure. And code enforcement liens are so unique because they attach to any property you own in that county. It's not necessarily to the property that has those code enforcement issues, right? So if me, Jen Whay, owns a property on Main Street and I own one on Bay Breeze and I have code enforcement liens on Bay Breeze, that code enforcement lien says this attaches to any property that I own. So unfortunately, sometimes I've seen it where, you had a closing agent who's not very experienced. They see the code enforcement lien and they see, oh, yeah, it's against my seller, but it's against a different property, and they just ignore it. I actually have one right now that we're doing a refinance for, and the code enforcement lien is on a property they sold 4 years ago, and he's refinancing, and it doesn't matter if it's homestead property, we have to pay that off. And he's like, but it's not my property. It's not, it was against my sister, a property we inherited, and there's nothing we could do about it. There are superior liens. He now has to go in front of the special magistrate to try and get those fees reduced because they never cured it. So a lot of these issues do come up that you wouldn't necessarily know if you didn't get a title search done.
What's an example of a code enforcement lien?
Overgrowth, like say somebody abandoned the property and there's overgrowth, there's junk in the yard, there's all sorts of code enforcement violations. And it just kind of depends on where the county is, like whether it's in city limits, municipality limits, on what that code could be for. But most of the stuff you see is overgrowth or junk. Sometimes you'll see code enforcement liens like somebody parked their commercial truck in their property and didn't remove it. So then there's fines. The code enforcement can be cured, which is it happens a lot, but then the county never releases that lien. So I would say half and half, the code enforcement violation was cured, but the release was never taken care of, or the penalties or fines were never paid, and they're just sitting there collecting interest. So, code enforcement liens could be very minimal, $100, $200, and easily turn into tens of thousands of dollars after years of just sitting there.
Wow.
Actually, I had a client of mine who purchased a home. When they were under contract, they had put a concrete slab in the back behind the home, behind the patio, to turn it into like a basketball court. The problem was, at being under contract, I don't think you guys are the title company on this one, Jennifer. I think it was an attorney. They found that it was permitted, but it was past his boundary. So it was going into the lot behind him. So would that fall into the category of a code violation, or would that be...
It's both. That'd be a code violation and a boundary dispute. Yeah.
So, well, speaking of attorneys, that's another topic that gets asked a lot. What is the difference? And when a client comes to you as an agent, like David or I, and they said, hey, we want to be represented. We want to have an attorney take over this. Now, we do know other states, some states do attorneys. Here, you kind of see a mixture. But what is your take on the difference? What does one offer and the other one does not?
I love this question, especially because I started my career, I do have a legal background. I have my bachelor's in pre-law. I started in a real estate attorney's office before I got headhunted to come to a title company. What I love about this question is that there should be no difference between the two. Whether I'm a licensed title agent or an attorney, we both have a fiduciary duty to our underwriter, and that is to make sure that we can provide a clean title and a clean transaction to convey the property to the new owner, right? So our duty is to make sure that it's insurable, right? So our underwriter relies on us to make sure that we clear all those conditions, and we make sure that there's no claim that can be filed against the property in the future, right? So whether you're closing with me or you're closing with an attorney, that's our ultimate goal. And the way I like to explain this is that your clients should always rely, not always rely, but they should take in not only your input, but they should be doing their own research, right? say you suggest like, listen, I like to close with Jennifer Whay at First International Title. Here's her website. Here's her phone number. Call her. You would not believe how many times I've picked up the phone and talked to a client while you guys were in the middle of negotiations. And they're like, what's your closing fee? What can I expect? And I'll walk them through the transaction. I give them my phone number and I say, what puts me aside from any other title company? Because let's face it, we're in Florida. There's thousands of them. Is I'm here for you. I'm available. Here's my cell phone number if you need me. I have a great relationship with your agents. They know how to get a hold of me on the nights and weekends. They know how I work. And go check out my Google. Go check out Facebook. See what other clients are saying about them. It's really the client's responsibility to do their diligence and make sure that they're comfortable. Because if they're comfortable, it doesn't matter how good of a job I do, you're never going to make them feel that way. If they really wanted to use their title company or their attorney, then they should use them because that's who they're comfortable with the transaction. And that's what's going to make it go smoothly. They're going to make sure to get that client, that closing agent or that attorney, all of the information that they need. So, I would always like to say, use me, but I totally understand that sometimes you just have those relationships, and especially people coming from different states where only attorneys can handle real estate transactions like New York, Georgia, they're just so set in their ways. They want an attorney to do it. And that is no problem. An attorney does exactly what I do in the transaction. They shouldn't be representing one side or another. They should be representing the transaction as a whole and making sure that that title is clear. Everything is ready for, to get to the closing table and to provide clear title to the company, to the client.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, about people coming from other states, buyers coming from other states. They're set in their ways with attorneys. That's where they come from. So when they come down, you automatically think like, who's their attorney and who's our attorney? I'm like, well, we don't even need to use attorneys. We can do title company.
And we also have attorneys. We have underwriting attorneys that we can go to, right? So let's face it, they have the ultimate goal or the ultimate say because they're the one insuring the transaction, right? They're the one saying, hey, we will give them a title policy as long as these conditions have been met. So if there's a title issue, we go straight to them. We're like, hey, you're insuring it. You're going to make sure this is clear. What do you want me to do to clear this? If I don't know that answer, or if I do know the answer, I go to the attorney and I said, listen, this is our title issue. We want to bond this lien out and this code enforcement lien out until they can get in front of the special magistrate or whatever the issue is. And we'll get direction from them and go to the clients and say, hey, we can close this and this is how we're going to fix it. A time that I could understand where everyone's like, oh, we love using real estate attorneys because they're there to represent us. They're not. They should be representing the transaction. They should be representing the underwriter because that's who our contracts are with, right? We're appointed. We're allowed to act as an agent on behalf of this underwriter. So they're not going to do what's in the best interest of your buyer or seller because they can't. They have to do what's in the best interest of the transaction to provide clear title, right? So an attorney usually gets involved if there's escrow disputes. But even then, an attorney can't decide who gets the escrow dispute, right? They're just going to say, hey, we think we should get it, and this is why. And just like us, they can't release escrow unless there's a signed cancellation or release of escrow from both parties. They would have to do exactly what we would do, meaning if there's a dispute, we're going to give you a set amount of time to try and figure it out between the buyers and sellers. And if they can't, we're going to deposit those funds to the clerk of court, and then the clients are going to have to sue to get that money back. By the time they do that, there's no money left over. So I do get that. I'm not knocking attorneys. Like I said, I started my career there and I'm so thankful I did because they taught me so much. But that's normally where you see, you see an attorney get involved in transactions. And if that's the case, they can get involved anytime in the transaction. So you can always tell them, listen, if, say your client's not picking or paying title, the seller is, and they're hesitant because it's going to a title company, you can reassure them. So you can always get legal counsel to represent you. They'll review it if you need to. Like attorneys are always there for you. You just pay for it. Just like
I think you just clarified the biggest confusion that most buyer sellers have is that when you pick let's say the title company or an attorney, if you pick and pay them, that they're representing you only. I think a lot of people get confused with that. Maybe agents don't explain that clearly, that that's not the case, that they represent the transaction. They're closing the entire transaction. So if your buyer didn't pick and pay, your seller did, and your buyer has a question, feels like they're not being represented, they can call you or whoever's handling the closing process and ask them questions or ask them, hey, there seems to be going on.
A good title agent should always explain it. We always send every title company is required to send a copy of the title commitment out to the clients prior to closing. We send it as soon as it comes back, so everybody has it. So if they have questions, they should be picking up the phone and calling. It's so fun when they do because, I've been doing this for so long. I'm such a dork when it comes to real estate. So when somebody calls and asks questions, I'm like, oh, let's talk about it. Let me tell you what this title commitment says. Let me tell you what this is. What does that mean? And, or I love when a client's like, oh, it looks like we have a nice clean title. And I was like, we're not looking at the same thing, are we, bud? We've got payoffs and this and that. And, but that's what we're here for. We're here to explain. That's what we are. We are the professionals, right? We want you to come to us. We want your clients to come to us and let us answer those questions. Let us tell them what we need to do to clear title, especially when title defects. We have to send that notice that we have 20 days to cure a title defect. Like if it's something we know is going to take past the closing date, we send out that letter. We send it to all parties. We're like, listen, this could be a potential title defect. This is how I'm going to try and fix it. Maybe it was a prior seller whose spouse didn't convey, or there was a discrepancy in the legal description, and we need a little bit more time to fix that. We're going to put it in explanation, and everybody deserves the explanation. So just because it's, the buyer picked and paid doesn't mean that you're the other side can't pick up the phone and ask those questions.
So probably one of the other questions, I know we all get it a lot, and I'm hoping you can break it down for us a little bit easier, but I always get how much are the closing costs going to be or what's involved in those. Can you explain that a little bit better than probably I could?
Yeah. So closing costs is such a hard question to answer. And you think it's really simple, right? But it's all based off the transaction. If it's just a cash deal, your closing costs are just going to be like our closing fee, which is what we charge in order to handle everything, right? That's our fee to coordinate the closing, to take the money into escrow, to disperse those funds, to create the closing documents, to sit down with you, to clear title. So that your closing fee is just all of our mailing expenses, wire fees. It's all wrapped into one fee. Then we have something called a title search fee, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is what our underwriters charge in order to do a search from the root of title to where our current owner is, to make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed, that all the conveyance went correctly, that there's no outstanding judgments or liens from prior sellers out there. So it basically puts together the commitment to tell me what I need to do in order to get clear title to the next person, right? Title insurance is what we talked about. It's based off purchase price. And then we have something called a municipal lien search. So the municipal lien search is just something extra that these items may not have made to the public records for recording yet. For instance, delinquent utilities. The utility companies, you could be delinquent 3 or 4 months before they'll file a lien. And most utility companies, especially Charlotte and Sarasota County, will not switch over the utilities unless we order a payoff statement from them and show proof that the property has transferred and that we collected those delinquent utilities and are mailing that payment in, right? So that's what the municipal lien search. The municipal lien search also looks at open permits or expired permits. Like, what Dante had said in his situation, they didn't pull the right permit, or maybe it didn't pass inspections. So we notify the seller. There's usually fees involved for expired permits to get those reopened and inspected. And a municipal lien search also reaches out to the code enforcement office and makes sure that there's not any recent pending. So you have to think code enforcement. Normally they send you a letter saying, hey, you've got overgrowth. You've got 30 days to fix it, right? Say they didn't fix in 30 days. Sometimes they'll give you a little extra time, or then they start the lien process. So it might not show up in public records yet. So we go there and say, hey, are there any code enforcement currently open that haven't made it to the lien process? Because if you fix it in that 30 days, they just walk away from it. They said, okay, you complied. Here's your compliance letter. Nothing's ever filed in public records. So there's that extra search in there that's required by underwriters now. And this all came about when we had our crash, back in the 2006, 7, 8 era. And all these properties had these humongous delinquent utilities, thousands of dollars. And they had code enforcement violations because people were stripping the houses out and just walking away from it. So these municipal lien searches is actually a result of the crash that we had, to make sure that we can now ensure clear title, and that your seller, your new buyer, doesn't go turn the utilities on. They're like, nope, sorry, you got to pay $800 of the prior past owners before we'll put this in your name.
That makes sense.
Yep. What do we see often on those settlement sheets and HUD statements is credits. It's typically those done like last second too. I just had one closing last week where we had a credit the day of closing because, by accident, the movers took their fridge out of the kitchen and put on a moving pod to another state. So what do we have to do? We have to do a credit because, they're asking, buyers are asking where the refrigerator is. So little things like that.
We see that a lot with washer and dryers.
I
Washer
was going to say,
dryers.
I've had that a couple of times with the washer
Every
dryer.
time I'm like doing the walkthrough, I'm like, is the washer and dryer there?
That's a whole other topic too about appliances and stuff, but we'll get into that. A question that I had that I think a lot of buyers and sellers ask is where can they do closings at? Right. Obviously, you guys have a branch, you have an office, but you've done a lot of things for us too, where mobile closings, they pretty much be anywhere. And then talk a little bit about mobile notaries as well.
Yeah. So another thing that came out just because of the world we live in today was, COVID really brought remote online notarization to be more common. So remote online notarization has been approved for years and years, but no lender wanted to touch it. No title company wanted to deal with it. And then COVID hit where we couldn't have in-person closings anymore, right? So it really forced our industry to accept this remote online notarization or remote closings. In the state of Florida, I would say we consider anything that's not signed in our office remote, whether it's done online or in person with a notary in your state or your county, wherever you are. Our office or our company here, we have 36 offices throughout the state of Florida. So my office personally, if you close on a property here and you live in Florida and you don't have an office, we don't have an office near you, we'll eat that mobile notary fee, right? Because that's our convenience of closing with us. We want to be that number one title company in the state of Florida. So if we don't have an office there, we're gonna eat that notary fee for you. But if they're out of state, for instance, which happens all the time, Florida's your second home or the retirement state. They're not here full time. They're snowbirds. We can do remote online notarization, which is basically like what we're doing now, kind of like a Zoom call. You get on with the notary. You have to answer something called KBA questions, which is like everyone has done them, right? Like, have you ever lived in one of these houses?
Security
Questions that are knowledge-based only for you to answer. It confirms your identity, and then you just do the remote online notarization. You press the little buttons, follow through with the notary. It's a great tool for those who they don't even have to be, tech savvy. They just have to have a general concept of technology, I feel like. And then but we do have a lot of older clients who just maybe they don't have an iPad. Maybe it's too hard to do it from their phone. And what we do is we have a company that we actually have to vet all of our notaries through. It's nationwide. So not only we order everything through them, the fees anywhere from like $125 to $150, but that notary's been vetted. We know that it's not, because that's huge. Notary fraud is crazy, right? On the rise. People will steal your notary stamp. They can get your commission ID just by going online and finding a document you notarized, right? So these notaries are vetted. Their system is secure. We have to upload the documents because all of our closing documents, think about it, have non-public information. So we upload it through the secure website. They pull the documents. They take them to go get notarized with the client, and then they email them back into the portal so we can check for accuracy and then overnight them. So every closing we do require that we use one of our notaries, and that's just to combat fraud, because fraud is the biggest thing that we worry about in our industry. It's huge in our industry. So we take all the precautionary steps to make sure that we're doing everything we can to weed out any kind of fraud within a transaction.
Correct me if I'm wrong too, but if it's a cash transaction, you can even do something like electronic signature application, like .loop or DocuSign. I know we've done a few of those.
We do. So cash buyers, we can do everything electronically, right? They can e-sign it through DocuSign or any kind of electronic platform for them. But for a seller, most of their documents have to be notarized, so they don't necessarily get that option.
Right. And if you have a lender involved or a loan involved, you have to do the loan.
Yeah, lenders involved. I haven't had a lender yet that will allow remote online notarization. So it's usually us sending a notary to you to sign your documents if there's a lender involved.
That makes sense. Well, you heard it here first. If we need a title company for all you viewers out there, Jennifer said they're covering the mobile notary costs. So,
yes.
just throw that out there.
Yeah.
So this all sounds like a lot. What's the typical time that you see from when you get a contract to when it's done, closed, they get the keys to the house?
Usually 30 days is the typical time frame. We've done it a lot sooner. I actually just had one where I got the contract on the 26th, the day after Christmas, and we closed it on the 30th because they wanted to close in time for Homestead. Yeah. But again, I can tell you, I can get a deal done in 3-4 days. It's all based on the transaction, right? So if there's a homeowners association, Florida state statute allows them 10 business days to get us the information we need to close, right? So I might not be able to make a short time frame if there's a homeowners association, especially if it's a condominium and the buyer didn't put their application in yet. That's the biggest thing that holds us up, right? So there are certain terms, not every transaction is the same. So would I like to say, yes, we can get everything done in 5 to 7 business days? Absolutely. But that's usually for someone who maybe there's no payoffs, there's no homeowners association. It's a nice clean title. It's like a closer's dream, right? Silver platter. We don't get those that often. There's usually homeowners associations, there's payoffs. Clients aren't here, so their mail-away is back and forth. So the typical, especially with a finance deal, they normally can't get them done any sooner than 20 to 30 days because lending actually has rules and guidelines that they have to follow as far as disclosures. So they have to disclose information to you and then wait a certain time frame before they can actually close on the property. So for finance deals, you're looking at 20 to 30 days, sometimes 45, depending. And then cash transactions, my office, and we're not all created equal. We work as each transaction's closing within the next 10 days. Because we don't want to be the reason why your closing is getting held up. Because you would not believe that as soon as your inspections are over, all of a sudden the buyer's like, let's get this done. And now title's like, oh, wait, we don't have the survey back. We're still waiting for the estoppel. Like, we don't want to be that reason. We want to be the one who says, hey, I'm done. I'm clear to close. Like I just did one today. Our closing date's on the 11th. And I was like, just want to let everyone know it's a cash deal, but I'm clear to close. We're ready when you are. I just need a 24-hour notice. And they were like, what?
I think the biggest thing buyers and sellers forget is that you're reliant on so many different parties in a transaction, right? So if it's not you that messes up, or I wouldn't say mess up, but something's missing or it's not there yet, there's always you have to coincide with the lender as well. Make sure that they're all done and everything that they need is done. We've had to extend transactions for them all the time. Or the survey company, about if you're in a more rural area and there's not a lot of surveyors out there, they're backed up. It could take 4 weeks for your survey. Or the HOA. HOA is another big, how many transactions have we done together where it gets extended out a week or two. You do 1,000 phone calls trying to get it done.
Because the buyer's like, oh, no, I had to pay the application fee. And you're like, oh, really? Because I emailed you, Dante emailed you.
And a lot of them too make you drop the check off in person, so you might have to wait for that for if they're out of state and it's got to get mailed. So
I would say homeowners associations, HOA applications are probably the biggest delay we ever see, and it's so hard because let's face it, we are not a like blamer or like name blame kind of thing. I'm not going to be like, oh, I dropped the ball, Dante dropped the ball. Like, we're all here to support each other. Everyone makes mistakes, but 80% of the time, it's the consumer. So how do you go to the buyer and be like, well, it's kind of your fault? You just kind of like, I know these silly associations, but as soon as you get that in, like, we're going to keep calling them. I've had Dante drive to an association before and be like, get this done. So, I mean, they are usually the biggest. I would say if a closing is delayed, it is, and I hate to say that, but it is like 60 to 70% of the time is because of the association. Either a buyer didn't get their application in, or the biggest thing are condo associations. The minute we know it's a condo, we've just done this so long that my processor, she's amazing. She will tell them right away, listen, thanks for the escrow deposit, go work on your application now, right? Those are the two things that we hound them on. Get your escrow deposit in and go get your application started. Because sometimes the association won't even release the information to us until they've done that. So now you're putting us behind on our schedule as far as like how we like to clear title. So, and mistakes happen, especially because they've never done this before. And most of the time when an association is being delayed, it's because they didn't get the application fee or the seller didn't sign the application. Right? Have you ever seen that? We got an application in that not only the buyer had to fill out, but the seller had to sign something. It's silly to me, but it's their requirement. You got to play by their rules. So they'll be like, well, why wasn't this approved? What happened? They're like, oh, the seller never signed it. And it's like, well, could you have told us that? So, again, it's always really important to make sure that you have a really good title agent that you work with because, for instance, because we've done this for so long, we have such a great catalog of homeowners association, condos associations, and their property management companies and their contacts. So we can make sure that we're staying on top of it and saying, hey, did you get this application? Is there anything missing? What more do you need in order for us to get our estoppel back? So we really stay on top of things because we know that is one of the biggest thorns in our sides when it comes to getting a transaction and closing. Yeah, we have a mobile home owners association. I won't say the name of it, but they were a little difficult to work with. And I was like, you know what? I do a lot of business in here. Like, I need to get them on my side. I dropped off cookies every week for like 2 months. Guess what? My estoppels are in. If there's an issue, they call me. And I'm like, man, that's all it took was some Publix cookies 2-3 times a week, or just 2-3 times a month. Whatever you do to butter them up to make sure that, because my realtor does a lot of business in there, and I knew she relied on me. And I'm like, I'm going to work with these people. I'm going to force them to like me. And the Italian in me was like, feed them.
The thing too is like we forget also that in HOAs, home sales is only one part of what they handle. Like all we do is a transaction. They have home sales, they have community issues, they have other things going on. So they're like, we're getting 1,000 phone calls about home sales going on in transactions when we're trying to focus on all this other stuff going on.
That makes sense. I never really thought about it like that, but yeah, you're right.
I try to give them the doubt, but
especially if it's a condo association where you actually the buyer has to be approved. Sometimes the property management doesn't have control over that. They can get the whole package together and then they submit it to the board, but they have to wait for the next meeting. What if they only meet once a week? Or, sometimes you can get board members, they don't need actual meetings, but a lot of them, there's like, no, you have to wait, and they meet every Wednesday. Well, our closing's on Thursday, and we got them everything the Thursday before. So now we're like at the last minute. So that's why it's really good to just communicate and have an understanding of, it might sound silly, like, hey, we're telling you, go get this application in today. If you wait a week, that week can make a huge difference on whether we're closing on time.
I agree. Well, we've been grateful for your time with us and giving us all this insight. We do have one last question for you, for the buyers and sellers. Since you've been in this industry for so long and you have a lot of experience, is there any advice that you can give to home buyers or sellers? Something that most people mess up on or wish they would have done differently? Or any kind of secrets or hint that you could give them to make a transaction smoother or easier going?
I would say there's a couple of things. I would say the thing that I hear the most, you have to understand, by the time I get to the clients, we're at the end of the transaction, right? I'm sitting there, we're at the end of the table, and that's normally when you're going to hear your grievances. You're like, how was your experience? You're just talking about the transaction. The biggest one I see or I ever hear of is somebody has a grievance with their agent, right? They're like, they're looking at their commission, they're seeing what they're paying, and they're like, I don't know what they did for me, blah, blah. And I always try to put it back in their court. And I said, oh, that's such a shame. Did this just happen? They're like, no, ever since we listed it. I'm like, okay, well, then you should have addressed it then, right? The way we look at it, especially in my industry, is you are only as good as your weakest link, right? So you want to make sure everybody is up to your expectations. If you are happy with somebody, I feel like that's when you should be open and honest with your communication. And if you're still not getting that, there are plenty of agents like you guys that are phenomenal. There's not one closing I've ever had where somebody had anything negative. They are usually praising you. They'll bring you guys gifts to closings. The reviews you guys get are phenomenal. And that's what you want. So I feel like people should be able to speak up because you guys are handling, as well as us, the largest purchase that most people make, right? Wouldn't you want to be happy? If I went into a doctor's office and they weren't performing, you're going to find another doctor. So I would just say, there are so many agents out there that deserve the business. And if you're not getting that kind of communication, you're not getting what you feel, then you should be communicating that. Because the last thing you want is a bad review where maybe it was just a mix of personalities or something along those lines. That I just feel like there's so many good agents that we really shouldn't be having those type of problems, right? And not only that, but usually those really good agents, they're not only really good at their job, they have such a great network around them. I love when I get one of your guys' closings at the table because they're like, man, Dante and David took care of this. Their lender's phenomenal. Did you see that we got, we closed 10 days before? My home inspector was awesome. And it was only this amount and you've done a great job. And it's like, yeah, because they've been in this industry long enough that they have surrounded themselves with like-minded people. So they're going to expect that same customer service from everybody you guys recommend because that's the standard that you set. So I feel like it's really important to do your research, to look up Google reviews, get some feedback. There can never be somebody like, oh, I didn't know he was like that. And then you go to that realtor's, check their Google and you're like, what? Did you not look at this? There's some, that can kind of bring some. So I would say, at the beginning of the process, making sure that they're really comfortable with who they're working there because it makes a world of difference on how the rest of the transaction is going to go. And then I would say the only thing that, most buyers and sellers don't know, because a lot of them are coming from another state, right? Florida is our own little wild animal. So my biggest thing is oh, well, in Ohio, we do this. In New York, we do that. And I'm like, okay, well, in Florida, this is how we do things. But the biggest question we get asked are property taxes, right? They're getting their bill in November and they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I try to do my best to explain it, but we're not always there for closing. Say it was a mail away, they e-signed their documents and they didn't get my spiel. You guys have all been there for my closings, and they didn't get a real explanation of property taxes. So that is something I like to explain ahead of time, or I try to explain as much as possible, because it is the most common asked question of why are these taxes paid in arrears? Why am I getting this bill? Am I responsible for it? Did the seller pay it? Or a seller who comes to me and says, oh, no, I already paid this year's taxes. And I was like, well, it's March, so that's impossible because our tax bill doesn't come out till November. So I would say after closing, that and homestead are probably the two biggest questions we get. But those are something that we try our best to address at the closing table. But like I said, not everyone is always there. So sometimes, like ourselves, we have great literature that we can also email them after closing that explains all of those issues.
So I'm going to go off script for a minute because you just said it and I was thinking about it. Can you do your closing spiel on homestead real quick so people watching can understand that?
Yeah, so homestead exemption is, Florida is amazing when it comes to our homestead exemption. So homestead exemption in the state of Florida does a couple of things. One, it can take up to $50,000 off the assessed value. So if your property appraiser assesses your property at $300,000, it would take $50,000 off that, and your taxes would be assessed at $250,000 instead of the $300,000. So not only does it do that the first year that you own the property, so you have to own the property January 1st of that current tax year, right? The second thing it does is it stops your property taxes from going up more than 3% a year, which is a huge saving, especially in Florida. If you think about how much, I think they say on average, our property values are anywhere from 4 to 7% increase, right, on an annual basis. So it can't go up more than 3% a year. So you get to keep all of that savings. So if your property starts to skyrocket, you're capped at that 250. It's only going to go up 3%, 3%, 3%. You're not going to get these huge increases in property taxes. And the best example I have of this, or my favorite example, is I did a real estate closing for an elderly woman who lived out in Siesta Key for 25 years. Okay. We sold her property for $3.4 million. Her assessed value on her property taxes was $580,000.
Wow.
She had homesteaded it the entire time she had owned the property, right? So the best thing about it is the buyers who were coming down from New York were like, your taxes are nothing. And I was like, whoa. Let me explain the reassessment.
They're nothing to her.
More often than you think. That happens all the time.
It does. That sale triggers the reassessment. And I was like, your taxes are not going to be that, which it's easy to kind of give them an idea because it's all based off the assessed value, which is usually about 20% under market value. So you could kind of estimate that for them and then just pick the most current millage rate for that year and give them an idea of what property taxes are, which I found out from that client is still a fraction of what they would have been in New York where he was. So he was still happy with it. But it was just one of those instances where I was like, see, this just shows you the benefit of those property taxes, of your homestead exemption. I drill it in my clients. I give them literature on it. And then, I tell them as a joke, like, if I come back and do your refinance and I don't see this homestead exemption on there, we're going to talk. I'm going to sit there right there with the computer and we're going to file your homestead right now, right? We're not doing anything else until you get this homestead against your property.
Yeah, that comes up a lot, actually.
It
the more
does.
question probably or concern is like, when they were towards the end of the transaction or when we close the transaction, they call me back up 2-3 months later. How come my taxes have jumped like $2,000? And I'm like, well, the previous owner has owned it since 1989 and they're just now selling it in 2024. It's a big difference. So it's got reassessed.
Yeah, it's just all about educating your clients. And the more that you know and the more you can educate them. My favorite thing is especially when, you're able to educate our realtors and tell them like what you were saying about the property taxes, that when it does come to that, they're like, oh yeah, I remember Dante told me about this at closing, or my closing agent mentioned this. It just reassures them like, man, they knew what they were talking about, right? We try to educate you guys as much as possible. We don't want you to know everything, right? We're the professionals in certain areas, so we want to be able, but we want you to be able to answer those questions so that when it does come up, they're confident. They're like, and then they go to the next person. They're like, listen, you got to use my realtor. He did this, this, and this. He told me this was going to happen and it did. His agent was there. I was informed ahead of time. So, you guys have such a great value in the home purchasing or home sale based off your knowledge and your expertise. So, I think when we were talking about earlier about, whether to pick a title company or a real estate attorney, it's all based off experience in this industry. Just like you guys, you can go out there and get licensed just like I can, but it doesn't mean you know how to apply that in the real world, right?
Mhm.
I can tell you right now that when I took my escrow license test, I had been already doing real estate closings for almost 10 years. I didn't even study, and I went in and took that test, but there was nothing on that test, barely anything that applied to what I do on an everyday basis. So it's really based off experience, knowledge, and how much you guys educate yourselves and us just on all of the changes in the industry. You know, we just have the new contracts coming out where they made a couple updates, and we're going to have classes on that, teaching you guys like, hey, this is really good to point out because the new change to the as is contract or the FAR bar contract is that the seller, whoever pick and pay title, usually bears the cost, right? Well, now that other side may have a closing fee assessed to them that can be charged by the closing agent. So for instance, when we handle a real estate closing and the buyer picks and pays, we still charge the seller up to $100 because we have wire fees for them, maybe overnight fees if they weren't here. So fees that we have to recoup because they weren't here for closing, which sometimes, you know, a good agent will point that out and ask, hey, why are you charging that? And, you know, we'll explain or we'll reduce it down. We try to do a standard fee, but obviously if there's no payoffs, my clients are coming in, there's just one wire, we're not going to charge anything to the other side. But if there's a bunch of stuff, like I have one, it's closing at the end of the month, 6 airs. I was like, guys, I got 6 overnights. I got 6 wires.
Yeah,
you know, there's a little fee for us doing that kind of work for them. So it's just about educating yourself and being upfront and informative to your clients and to you guys as well.
I think the biggest takeaway is ask questions. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're a buyer, seller, don't be afraid to ask questions. I mean, that's what we're here for. I mean, certain things for realtors, certain things for title companies. I mean, there's times where we have to call, I'm going to call you a week.
Yeah, I love that. My favorite is from David. He's like,
you're going to bring it up.
know it's 6 o'clock on Saturday, but do you have time for that? Stop asking me. Just call me.
I've texted you so many times after hours and on the weekends, and even if you're not in the office, you get back. So, and we
Yes.
appreciate that.
We are
Yeah.
very grateful for that. Yes.
Yeah, I try to use that. I put myself in the consumer's shoes. I always have. It's just the way my brain works, right? Like I want to treat my clients how I would expect to be treated. And I'm going to be honest, when I first started my career, first time home buyers, I was young, you know, I was only 23, 24 when I started. And I'm like, they drive me crazy. They ask all these questions and blah, blah, blah. And my attorney sat down and was like, you have to understand, they're spending $300,000. When's the last time you spent $300,000? And I was like, I will answer every question they ever have to ask, because she's right. When you put yourself in that shoe, like, this is exciting. It's usually their first home, or they're moving to Florida, which they've always wanted to. They're going to retire, you know, whatever the case is on why they're moving where they are. It's an exciting process. And you want to make it as desirable and enjoyable as possible so that not only do they use you again, but they refer you out to other people. So by putting myself in the consumer's shoes and, you know, answering, I know you guys aren't a 9-to-5. Most title companies and attorneys are. That's just not realistic. I would rather you pick up the phone, call me, ask me that question so you can get that contract under. Because what's going to happen if you have to wait till Monday? Maybe now the buyer doesn't want it. Maybe they moved back to, they traveled back up north. Maybe they have buyer's remorse or another offer was accepted. You know, I want to make myself, and that's just something I offer. I want to make myself available because it could take me 2 seconds to answer a question for you and get that under contract, or have a 5-minute conversation with your buyer, give them the warmth and fuzzies because, you know, maybe the seller countered and wants them to pay title. And now they're like, oh, wait, what does that entail? What is the cost? And you could get me on the phone and I can help walk them through that.
Definitely.
Very great. We've always had great feedback from our buyers and sellers that have worked with you. We've had some that still call us asking how you're doing. Months after transaction. So I won't name drop anybody and make them uncomfortable, but they call all the time, ask like, oh, how's Jennifer at the title company?
Yeah.
And so
we love that. I always tell my clients, whoever called, because the first thing they tell me, it's so common. They're like, I know this is a silly question. And I'm like, listen, there are no dumb questions when it comes to real estate, because the one question you think is silly could be the reason why this is delayed, right? Like, you didn't get that witness on the deed, or you didn't send us the information on time, or you're going to be on a cruise and now we can't get you at your closing date. So there's no silly questions when it comes to real estate. Everything is important. Everything, you know, we're here to answer those questions for you, because I would rather you ask than just assume. And then now we're struggling to try and fix whatever problem there was. So
one thing I have to say about us, you know, David and I with team and partnering with you guys, is we're confident. When somebody asks us like, hey, for recommendation on a title company,
it's all about relationships that you guys build. And I think that's really, really important.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, no, I agree. 100%.
Is there anything you think we missed? Anything that
I don't think so. I think you guys asked really hard, good questions.
Excellent. Well, Jennifer, we appreciate it. We'll let you get back to work, and I'm sure I'll be in touch tomorrow with some questions on the trade.